It's been over a year since I bought the PYXIS 6K camera. And originally I was going to do a review on this camera when I first got it, but instead I wanted to use this camera for at least a year before doing an in-depth review. And I'm really glad I did, because now I feel like I know this camera inside and out. I know what it does well and I know its faults. And when this camera first came out, there was a huge amount of hype around it. Now that that hype has died down, was that all just influencer marketing? Or is the hype justified? So sit back, relax, and let's talk about the PYXIS 6K, deep dive into what it's capable of. But more importantly, is it still worth it in 2026? And a quick thank you for today's sponsor, RigDesigner. So for a bit of context, I was shooting on Blackmagic's Pocket cinema line first before I got this camera. And as you know, with that Pocket camera range, they focus more on DSLR style bodies. And this is really important to note when you go from the Pocket cameras to this camera, which I think a lot of people are going to do. And what Blackmagic do really well is what's called the graduation effect. You start off with the Pocket line, which are very affordable cameras and great for beginners. Then you slowly work your way up, like me for example. I started off with the Pocket 4K. Then next year they released the Pocket 6K, which I didn't get. But then after that they released the Pocket 6K Pro, which is the one that I got and which I'm shooting on right now. The Pocket line of cameras are great, but they were in between a cinema camera and a DSLR style body. They were in between those two worlds instead of just leaning into one. And for me personally, the PYXIS 6K is the next step in that graduation effect. From going from that DSLR style body to now the more traditional box style cinema camera. And that's why this camera is so important to me personally, because it's the next step in my career, in the right direction for my career and where I want it to go. And a box style camera like this can be quite intimidating. So if you are someone looking to make that next step, then hopefully this video can help you out in some way. Now, I'm not trying to sell you this camera or anything like that. I'm just going to speak from my experiences and my opinions when using this camera for over a year. And I've used it on client work, I've used it on events, weddings, I've used it on narrative pieces, documentaries. I've used it in so many different ways. So I feel like I am qualified to talk about this camera in depth. If you do have any questions throughout this video, feel free to comment down below and I'll do my best to answer, because there's a lot of factors and a lot of moving parts when it comes to getting a camera like this. The first thing I'm going to talk about is its greatest strength, which is the box style body. Now, it does already have Tilter's PYXIS cage on it, because I feel like this camera only works when you have a cage like this on it. So all it has is the left and right ribs and the top plate and the bottom plate, with a variety of different quarter threads and eighth threads. I found it really hard to rig this camera without a cage. You can pick this camera up for around £2,600, which I think is crazy value for money. But I did buy this camera at £3,600 when it first came out. So within that time, already there's a big £1,000 price drop. If the camera was £3,600, would I recommend it now? Possibly not, because of the PYXIS 12K. But now that it's dropped down to that price, that is a really good and affordable price, especially for a full frame camera like this. But again, going back to that box style body, you are going to need to rig this camera out and get accessories for it, aka the top monitor here, a side handle, and even batteries. Because yes, the camera, when you buy it new, doesn't even come with batteries. And I remember when this happened, a lot of people were very shocked and surprised by this. And I get it, you buy a camera, you expect to at least have a battery that comes with it. But in all honesty, and I'm not trying to back up Blackmagic here or anything, but for me, I would rather the price of the body be a lot lower. But when you're working with cinema cameras, you're expected to already have V-Lock cameras, Sony BPU batteries, and so on. It does come with the power leads so that you can plug it into the mains and operate it. But if you are thinking about getting this camera, it does not include batteries, so you do need to get your own batteries. Going back to personal preference, when going back to shooting with the Pocket 6K Pro, I find it really hard to shoot with that camera because you're pigeonholed into how you shoot because of the nature of that body. But with this camera, you can rig it out very specifically on what you're looking to shoot. If you want the side handle on the left or the right, you can change that. If you want a handle on the right and the left, you can do that. If you want a top handle or no top handle and just the monitor on top, you can do that. Do you see the point I'm trying to make here? It's very versatile and very flexible depending on the specific client, the specific shoot, and the specific shot that you're looking for. But with the box style cinema body, you need to be prepared to buy those extra attachments. attachments, side handle, top handle, a decent cage to mount these accessories onto. But once you pass that hurdle, this camera is so much better to shoot with when compared to the pocket line. Next up, we have the sensor. The sensor is a full frame sensor with a huge sensor size of 6048 by 4032. This is referred to open gate 3x2. And what I do like about this camera is the wide variety of different shooting formats. However, you can only shoot B-RAW. This is a downside because the pocket cameras you can shoot ProRes 422, but this camera, however, Blackmagic have done it again in terms of pigeonholing. You can only shoot Blackmagic RAW. This can be a little bit frustrating when you're sending footage to a client who's not experienced in editing, and then you need to explain to them that they have to download B-RAW as a media player. However, if you're in the more professional space, most editors would already have B-RAW or something similar downloaded because they're used to editing in different RAW formats. Okay, so we have the constant bitrate, 3:1, 5:1, 8:1, and 12:1. I also shoot 12:1, however, if the project is larger, more like narrative or documentary work, I'll move to 8:1. And then you have constant quality, Q0, Q1, Q3, and Q5, which I very rarely use because of its massive file sizes. But what I do like about this camera is all the different resolutions we have here. You have open gate, 6K 6x5, 6K DCI, which I very rarely use because of the 6K 16:9, 6K 2.4:1, Super 35 4x3, 4K DCI, which once again, if I'm shooting 4K, I often opt for 4K 16:9, Super 16 16:9, and HD. And because of that full frame sensor, you have a wide variety of different resolutions, which is very, very beneficial. However, you do get quite a large crop into the sensor when you change those resolutions. This is very important to know. If you do want to shoot 4K, you can see here that crop that it has on the sensor. So a 35mm is more closer to a 50mm, depending on what resolution you use. Sometimes this has forced me to shoot in 6K 16:9, which is extremely high resolution for some of the stuff that I've had to do. So yes, you can shoot 4K with this camera, reducing that file size. However, this camera is designed to shoot around that 6K mark. So keep that in mind when buying this camera. Do you have a strong variety of different lenses that will support shooting 4K and shooting 6K that will be wide enough and close enough? The crop on HD is crazy close, and quite frankly, I never shoot HD with this camera because it's so close up. Now, I believe that the 12K doesn't have a sensor crop when changing formats. This gives you the freedom to manually crop in as you wish. So that's another benefit that that 12K has over this PYXIS 6K. But with this full frame sensor, it has a lot of anamorphic capabilities. As you can see here, you can de-squeeze with a large variety of different anamorphic de-squeezes, ranging from 1.5 all the way to 2 times. So full frame sensors are definitely future-proof when it comes to anamorphics. With a full frame sensor, 1, it allows more light because there's a larger surface area on that sensor. 2, there's naturally just a shallower depth of field when you want that really stylized look. Now, there are 2 big downsides when it comes to getting a full frame sensor at this price point. 1 being the frames per second, and 2, the readout speed. You have, quite frankly, a lackluster amount of frame rate recordings when recording in this sensor. The maximum you can record at open gate full frame is 36 frames per second. And for me, that just gives you that little bit of extra slow-mo. Same again, when you drop down to 6x5, you're still getting that 36 frames a second. I would have really liked to have seen at least 50 frames a second when shooting 6x5. 6K 16:9, you get up to 46 frames per second. 6K DCI, you can have up to 48 frames. This is where things start to get interesting, which is 4K 16:9, you get up to 60 frames. I'll have all the frame rates on screen now. The highest you can go is 120 frames, but you have to shoot HD. And as I mentioned earlier, you have that super far crop in HD. The second downfall is readout speed. The readout speed is bad when you shoot open gate, and I could even see it in open gate, and you can see that swirling of that rolling shutter. However, when you crop into the sensor, that rolling shutter is a lot better, and you do see improvement. And I know that in DaVinci Resolve you can reduce that rolling shutter in the editing software. Now, in my experience, I never shoot open gate. I very rarely need to use that wide sensor. I often use 4K 16:9 or 6K 16:9, and I've never delivered a project or even viewed it in my own eyes, the rolling shutter, to the point where it's not usable footage. It's one of those things that you only notice if you're looking out for it, but it's definitely something that's very important to consider when buying this camera. Now, another benefit of this full frame sensor is its social media capabilities. Now, let's not pretend that social media and social media deliveries aren't important now. They have been important for a few years now, and you need to be ready to deliver those social media versions, those 9x16s and those 16:9s. For me personally, shooting both 4K horizontally and 4K vertically at the same time. Often, if social media is the priority format, then I will frame up for 9x16. So it removes the faff of reframing your 16:9 footage. And this is a really good way to upsell to a client. Look, I can deliver 4K 16:9 whilst at the same time recording and delivering a 4K 9x16. Another factor when comparing this camera to the Pocket 6K Pro, for example, is the built-in NDs. This camera does not come with any built-in NDs. And quite frankly, I prefer that, because when working with the Pocket 6K Pro and those built-in NDs, there's solid stops of ND. And I personally prefer to work with variable ND so that I can adjust the exposure specifically to how I want it, instead of relying on those huge chunks of stops when it comes to ND. Yes, it's very convenient, but by using the Tilta Mirage matte box and using that variable ND, for me, it's been a lot better and a lot smoother when finding that exposure. This camera does come in 3 different mounts: the PL mount, EF mount, and L mount. Now, for me personally, I would highly recommend the L mount version, because with L mount you can adapt to nearly every lens by using adapters. This ensures that your camera is future-proof, giving you a large variety of different lenses to use, without being pigeonholed into a specific type of lens mount. For example, I've got the L mount to PL adapter. That way I can use any PL lens I want. I have an L mount to EF adapter for cinema lenses. And finally, I have an L mount to EF mount for digital aperture control. You can see that L mount is the superior option, but at least then you're not forced to using just EF or just PL mounts like you would the other versions. And lastly, when it comes to the front of the camera, you have a mini XLR port at the front. It's a little bit of an odd choice to put it at the front like this. However, I wouldn't know where else that they would put it. And so far, it hasn't been a huge issue for me. Before I move on to the other parameters of the camera, I'm first going to very briefly rig it up how I would if it was a short film or a narrative piece. First, I put the Tilta Mirage matte box on the front of the lens. This has the ND filter, the variable ND filter that I mentioned earlier. The matte box also allows you to put filters on the front and to overlay different filters in front of the lens. Next up, once again, we've got Tilta, their rotating side handle, and what you can do here, grab this and you can rotate it around. For me, this is really good for this camera because it removes that strain off your wrist. And then I have a quick release on a NATO rail, so I can literally slide the handle on and off the camera like so. And you've got the top handle and the PYXIS monitor already mounted on the top. The Sony BPU battery for backup power. And for its main source of power, you have a power block from Newer with a V-Lock battery attached to the back. And we have a 2-pin LEMO from D-Tap cable from Condor Blue. If you want to know more specifically about this rig, head over to today's sponsor, RigDesigner. RigDesigner is an all-in-one platform by creatives for creatives. RigDesigner's platform allows you to build a rig from scratch. And this is really useful if you're just starting out or if you want to keep track of your rigs. And this has been really helpful for me when it comes to sending rigs to first ACs, producers and creative directors. They want to see not only what to expect from you, but specific rigs for specific shots. When you're first starting out, building a cinema rig from scratch can be quite intimidating. So head over to RigDesigner's community feed where you can find other people's rigs and even copy them. As long as you have the same camera as them, you'll be able to just copy someone else's rig that works. And this is definitely something I wish I had when it came to buying that first pocket camera, because I wasted so much money on buying accessories that weren't useful to the camera at all. And the community page is a great place for camera operators and camera nerds like me to go to ask questions, find what the best cage is for specific cameras, and just to help each other out in general. Their new rig guide page is a detailed and comprehensive look into specific rigs. And I will list my cinema rigs in the description below for you to look out, including this one. And this is really good for beginners because you can read different descriptions on specific parts of a specific rig. So not only is it fun to build a rig yourself, but it's actually educational. You can learn from people on this website, which once again is something that I wish I could have done when I first started. Now don't just take my word for it, RigDesigner has a strong ambassador presence, with big names backing them in the social media space. My favourite feature about RigDesigner is being able to see the total budget of each rig. This allows you to save up money for a specific rig that you want to get. Or if you've got a solid budget and you're in the market for a new camera and a new cinema rig, then head over to RigDesigner, find what one you like and what works for you with that budget in mind. RigDesigner is something that I genuinely use, and I have about 8 rigs on there now. But I've recently added 3 of my newest rigs that are best suited for this camera. RigDesigner is 100% free and a platform that I genuinely use. So make sure to go check them out in the description below. And once again, thank you to RigDesigner for sponsoring today's video. Now we're moving on to the left side of the camera, and this side is very, very interesting. You've got the 4-inch monitor on the side here, which when it first came out, a lot of people did not like. And I do understand, they come from the pocket line, myself included, where the monitor is on the back and it's easy to operate. But this obviously being on the side and not being able to fold out is rather silly. However, we are operating with a cinema camera now. If you look at big cinema cameras, they never have a monitor on the side or on the top or any monitor at all. And it's because when you're working with cinema cameras, you are often using a separate monitor. I never operate with this monitor, and it's not an operator's monitor. It's not designed to operate the camera with this monitor alone. And once we're on the topic of this side monitor, I'm going to briefly talk about the PYXIS monitor, because I do see it as part of the camera and the package. For me personally, if it wasn't for this PYXIS monitor, I probably wouldn't be using this camera. It doesn't require any batteries, the power supply goes straight from the camera to the monitor, which is a huge benefit because you don't have to worry about charging separate batteries, and it's just very, very convenient. You can also change the settings directly through the monitor, instead of relying on these side buttons. So the main buttons that you do have at the front on the side here is aperture. You've got the autofocus feature. If you hold this button down, it just gives you a bit of leeway when it comes to finding the focus on an autofocus lens. You've got this dial here, so once you click a button like white balance for example, you can then dial through the settings using that dial. And then you could even click down on the dial to leave that setting. You've got the photo button. This just exports a still from whatever footage you're capturing. And of course, you've got the big red record button. I definitely do think that this record button could have been placed in a better area of the camera. And moving on to what you expect for a Blackmagic camera, you have all of the buttons here. So you've got ISO, white balance, shutter speed, function buttons 1, 2, and 3. And how I've got these set up is function button 1 switches to social media format 16:9 to 9:16. So depending on what you're recording, when you export the video into editing software, it's already formatted to 9:16. This has been very, very useful if I'm delivering only social formats. F2, which is LUT applied on or off, and F3 being frame guides on or off on the PYXIS monitor. Then you've got zoom. This just allows you to hone in on your focus if you want to zoom in on the monitor and to see specifically what's in focus and just make sure that your image is sharp. In my first few months of using this camera, I very rarely use these side buttons and these side controls because I often just use the monitor, the touchscreen monitor. However, the more I'm using this camera, I've started to use those quick buttons a lot more. So for example, if I click white balance and then I can use the dial to change my white balance of the camera, click down on the dial and boom, that setting is done. And that's because I've used the camera for a long period of time now. So I've gotten used to where those buttons are in relation to the camera. And then of course you've got the menu button, which just allows you to see the full range of settings that this camera can offer. It works and it's quite quick. You hold the camera like this, you've got your thumb at the bottom and you can use your thumb to change those settings. So it works in that regard. And again, if it wasn't for the PYXIS monitor, I probably wouldn't recommend this camera. Something that I forgot to mention is that you can change the function buttons on this monitor as well. So what I've done, instead of relying on this record button, I've done the function button number 1 on the monitor to record. So often I use that button to record instead of trying to find the record button using my thumb on the side here. So the back of the camera is very busy and there's a lot going on. You have 2 SDI ports, one a 12G SDI signal outputting, and a separate port for timecode. You have 2 CF Express cards to record internally, but you can only record into one of those cards. You can't record onto both. You've got a 3.5mm audio jack to record audio externally, and of course you've got a 3.5mm jack for headphones, an Ethernet port to record proxies onto the DaVinci Cloud, and for power you've got the 2-pin LEMO here on the back. And of course, finally, you have the Sony BPU battery port. Now, what I will say about the battery port is that it can be very fiddly and loose. Now, this is something that I really don't like, but I've never lost power as a result of it. But it is something to mention that if you want that secure battery in place, you might experience some fiddly batteries. And of course, you've got the power button at the top here. You also have this USB-C port here to record externally into a separate SSD drive. There's not really much to say about the back of this camera, but what I will say is that it's a very odd choice to have all of the ports just directly on the back pointing outwards. This stops you from mounting a V-Lock battery directly to the back because you need those ports free and available to have cables sticking out of them. It would have been really nice to have seen, at least in the 12K camera, to see those ports being directed at an angle, similar to their Ursa line, so it allows clear enough room for those cables to go outwards behind the camera. I'm going to very briefly talk about the right-hand side of this camera. If you have the tilter cage, you can include this little base plate here and slide the SSD for external recording into this little slot here, so that it's out the way, it's not on top of the camera, and it's nice and controlled. And of course, the cage gives you room for this right rib cage to attach a handle on as well. I do like the fact that this side is completely bare, so it leaves a bit of real estate for me to add those attachments. When I was watching reviews for this camera, everyone spoke about the image quality and the frame rates and the full frame sensor, but they very rarely spoke about the audio inputs. But I'm going to talk very briefly about those audio inputs because I feel like they're very important for independent filmmakers. The internal recording for this camera is completely unusable. It's good for referencing, for hearing the slate being called out and to hear what's going on the day. But to actually use that audio for a client or use it as background, it's unusable. Now, once again, I was under the assumption it was going to be the same as the Pocket 6K Pro, which has really good internal recording. However, for a camera like this, it's not really designed to use that internal recording. But the other internal recording formats it does have is Mini XLR and the 3.5mm jack that I mentioned earlier. And now, since the newest update, you can record up to 4 audio channels. And this is very, very useful if you're shooting a podcast, an event, and you need those multiple audio options. And I think that that's something that's quite overlooked when it comes to this camera, is that you do have a lot of options, especially now after the update, for recording sound internally. Going back to that ultimate question, is this camera worth it in 2026? Well, to answer that question, it's all dependent on how much you're willing to spend. Because with this camera, you do need to get a lot of accessories with it. For example, the power solutions, having V-locks on the back of the camera, having the top handle, having the PYXIS monitor, the tilter cage, fast readout cards like the CF Express cards, or an external SSD. Then you need the tilter cage to attach that SSD onto the camera. These are all small accessories that do build up over time. And the question is, these are all accessories that work alongside the PYXIS 12K, its older brother. So the question is, if you're looking at this camera, would you rather spend a little bit more to get the PYXIS 12K, have better frame rates, better readout speeds, the ability to not have to crop into the sensor, higher dynamic range when it comes to shooting certain formats? The question that I'm asking myself is, what benefit does this 6K have compared to the 12K? And quite frankly, I'm finding it hard to find an answer. And the 12K shares the exact same body as this camera. So if you were to buy all of these accessories that I mentioned and then get the 12K, we're only talking about maybe £1,000 plus cost on that camera. But if you're starting out and you do want that lower budget cinema camera to start with, I do recommend the PYXIS 6K. Because it is nearly half the price, especially now that we're early on in the year, you can get a PYXIS 6K secondhand at really affordable rates. So I would possibly recommend starting with the PYXIS 6K. The problem that this camera has as well is the heavy full frame competition that it's going up against. You've got the full frame Sony FX3, which is a hugely popular camera. It's streamlined, it's got great image quality, it's got great frame rates, it's got great readout speeds, etc. And the same can be said about the newest Nikon ZR. But ultimately, do I recommend this camera in 2026? I think it all depends on what you're looking to shoot this year and future content. This camera is designed for cinematographers, for video production, for people who are in the short film creative space. With huge anamorphic capabilities, L mounts, you can adapt to any lenses. That's what this camera is for. But it can do events, client work, interviews very, very well. But if you're looking to do more videography work, which there's higher volume of that, then I recommend the Sony FX3 or something similar in that field. And if you're starting out and you're brand new to this industry, then I don't recommend this camera, because you need to know about SDI in and out. You need to know about white balance and manually focusing your cinema lenses. That full frame sensor is fantastic and it works with a large variety of different cinema lenses. The box style shape of this camera gives you unlimited potential when it comes to rigging out this camera, designing a camera for the project you're working on. And when you compare the awkward DSLR style of the Pocket line compared to this one, putting this camera on a gimbal is a lot easier. Okay, I'm going to summarize now. Yes, I do recommend getting this camera in 2026 if you're willing to spend a little bit extra on those external accessories. Would I get it at full price? No, I would not get it at full price at $3,600. I would get it secondhand from someone else at half that price, at least. That to me would be the recommendation when getting this camera. And I would only recommend it if you're looking to be a cinematographer and to be involved in lighting and video production and film production, documentaries and narrative pieces. Because ultimately that is what this camera is made for. Okay, that has been everything. I hope that this has been somewhat useful to you. If you do have any questions or comments, leave them in the comments section below and I'll do my best to answer them the best I can. Thank you guys so much for watching, and thank you to RigDesigner for sponsoring today's video. Make sure to check out my rigs on the website linked in the description below. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.